This podcast is sponsored by Path to Publishing, helping authors to take control over their publishing journey for over 21 years. Visit pathtopublishing.com to get on the path to publishing your next book.
Well, welcome to It's Truly Novel. Thank you for joining us, Grace. I would love to know what's new in your world, Grace.
Well, let's see. I do have something very exciting happening. I found out that a physicist is going to take my podcasts, The Poet and the Poem from the Library of Congress, and launching them to the moon.
Wow.
In July on Lunar Codex. And he's putting in 2 of my books. And he's curating art from 91 countries. And Brandy, it's on a disc this big.
Wow.
As big as a quarter, and it's going to be launched to the moon, to the ocean of storms, and it's going to land in the dust where I began.
Where we all began. But that's still cool. You're going to be a poetess in space.
Yeah, poetry on the moon.
Awesome. No, so that is truly outstanding.
Mm-hmm. So when the aliens get their act together, they'll have something to do in their time.
Yeah. I mean, well, you need nice poetry to listen to on that interstellar galaxy trip.
Exactly. That's what's new. I continue to do my podcast, and I'm thrilled about yours. I love the title of your podcast.
Well, thank you. It was something my husband and I came up with in the car. We were talking about, I wanted to open a space for writers and creatives to come together. Just anybody, to step in and have that space to be able to create. And so we were kind of brainstorming what kind of thing we would put on the title. And at first I thought, well, maybe we could call it the Ink Spot. But then I was thinking, well, the problem with that is it might be mistaken for a tattoo parlor. And I was like, yeah, we're definitely not selling tattoos here. So then we ran through a bunch.
More lucrative. It'd be a little more lucrative.
Maybe.
Than the arts. But you're right. We all must make a platform to keep the arts alive. I am with you 100%. Because otherwise civilization would sink in the mud.
It's true. Art creates the vision for civilization to follow.
That's your motto. That's a good motto.
One of the things that art does that most people don't realize is that art gives us hope. It shows us possibilities that we otherwise wouldn't have imagined. And in the process, gives us a reason to continue going when things look their darkest. It can serve as a reminder of why we shouldn't trot a certain path. That's the role of dystopian and apocalyptic literature and plays and art, is to show us this is what we're facing if we continue down this path. It's kind of a prophetic message.
Wow.
But
I really like that.
Beautiful art serves the purpose of painting that picture of where we could go if we but had the courage to follow our visions.
Or at the very least, to show where we've been. Because the artist experience is really everyone's, and we're just the ones that say it. But I know as early as Petrarch, the earliest poets from early times, the only record of human sensibilities that exist are from the poems. Not the land deals, not the selling and buying all through history, but the only way we knew how people felt are left in the poems. That's quite a record.
It is. I often say that writers vastly underestimate their potential impact on civilization. If you think about it, we are still reading the works of people who were alive over 5,000 years ago. So every writer, every artist truly should think about what impact they want to have, because they're going to impact not just this generation, but every generation to come.
And that's really all we have, because it's certainly not a lucrative way of life. Do you agree?
Well, I think it can be. I think in some ways we are the limiting factor. It is our own misunderstandings and misgivings surrounding money and value, why people pay what they pay. we don't know how to value ourselves, so we don't know how to communicate our value to other people.
You've got that right.
And when you don't know how to communicate that value, people are left guessing what the value should be. And when they have to guess, they won't value it at all.
We've been experiencing that. And I think you're right. We have inherited the idea of the artist and poverty. And most of us give away everything free because we think that's the way it is. But you have a very interesting point there.
Yeah, well, I worked with the homeless, and it was a very interesting day. We came out and we set up these things that you would think that they would have flown right off the table the minute we set them out there. It was dry shampoo, those emergency blankets, and we were in Denver, and we were coming up on, colder times, so you would think that would go really quickly. And one other lotion, okay? The lotion, they understood, that flew. The dry shampoo and the emergency blankets weren't moving. I couldn't understand it. I wasn't sure why. So I stopped and I talked to them, and I just kind of explained what these things did and the value of having them. Then they flew off the table. See, when people don't know what the value of a thing is, they will ignore it, pass by it, or just not take a look at it at all.
That is a very emblematic situation.
Even though the thing could save their life, like the emergency blankets, those things could save their lives.
Oh, it's
but they didn't understand what they were, and they didn't understand what the value was.
But did they look like blankets?
No, they're little. Because they're emergency blankets, these are the little aluminum blankets that get folded, the foil blankets.
You'd have to explain it to me too, I'm afraid.
They're made of the same stuff they use in space to keep the astronauts warm. They're very thin, very small. You can fold them into a compact square, literally, and carry them in a pocket, but they will keep you warm in below 30-degree temperatures. They're really quite amazing. And they were being offered for free, and they just weren't going anywhere until I stepped up and explained to them what they were and what they did. And I think that's where we as artists have failed, is we expect people to intuitively understand the value of what we create. But that's not how the human brain works.
Well, there has been no stall in the marketplace for the arts, really. Capitalism hasn't really moved aside to make room for it, except in the 1% art collectors.
Actually, that's not true. I think there's plenty of room for us in the capitalistic market. We don't necessarily understand how to play the game, though. And that's where you have to come in and start understanding. It's actually why I got into marketing and sales in the first place, was my art wasn't moving. People would walk by and say, "Oh, that's beautiful. I love that." But they wouldn't buy it. And I was like, why aren't they buying? If they like it, if they see the value of it, why aren't they buying it? And so that was the
answer. What was the answer?
The answer is they liked it, but they couldn't put it in dollars and cents terms. Like they couldn't put the value in terms of what it would mean to them in the impact of their overall life. It's like we look at something nice. How many people really value nature, right? If you ask them to pay for a quarter of nature, how many people are going to pay for a day in the sun? And yet, how much value does nature actually bring us? It helps us with our blood pressure. It helps us with our immune systems. It helps us. It has so much value. But until you break that down into something that relates to money, then people don't know how to value it.
So you were educated in marketing?
I educated myself. I went and I looked everywhere I could find for information about marketing so I could get better at promoting my art. And what I came to realize is that marketing is really about figuring out what message it is that your art is attempting to communicate. Who needs that message the most? And then finding where they hang out and being in that space, showing them through your service how your art adds value to their life.
Are you a visual artist?
I'm visual and a literary artist. Actually, I dabble across all spheres, really. It's easier to ask me what I don't do because it's a shorter list.
I did know your name, so that's a beginning.
Yeah, you did. Yeah. And it's kind of one of those things where I find value in learning as much as I can about a lot of different spheres because they end up touching on one another through, we're all connected human beings. So everything we do has some interrelation to another thing. Like I started learning programming and people were like, you're a writer and an artist. Why would you want to learn programming? It's like, that's like asking me, why would I want to learn French when I know English? Programming is just another language. It's a language that communicates with the computer and tells the computer what you want it to do for the person. That's all.
Did you do it? Did you learn it?
Yeah, I can program in C# and I can program in a couple of other languages.
Was it hard?
Yeah, it's challenging. It is because it's a fundamental shift in how you think. It's very much logic directed. There's no emotion in coding.
Is it mathematical?
It does have some math, but it's not as heavily math based as you would think. So, I mean, it's not like you don't have to know calculus or physics to be able to do coding well. You just have to be able to solve problems and think through them logically. So
I'll leave it to you. Thank you very much. There go my Sundays. Not one more thing.
Well, the reason I wanted to learn coding was I didn't actually start off wanting to learn coding at all. What I wanted to do was program a game that was designed for writers to help them get creative prompts to write more and learn to write better. That was my goal. And I couldn't find, I'm related to programmers, but neither of them were interested in my project. And so I came up across a choice where I could either let my dream die a death of attrition, or I could step up and decide, you know what? No, my dream's worth fighting for, and I will learn to code if that's what it takes to get it done.
Whoa, talk about tenacity.
Yeah, I'm a fighter by nature. Actually, it's funny. My mom tells me that when I was about a year old, I wasn't yet walking. I would walk, but I had to have a finger on the furniture. Just one finger. As long as I had one finger, I was okay. But the minute I would let go, I would fall. Not because I needed to fall, but because I was sure that I couldn't. And then she put me in front of my cousin, Jeffrey, who was 2 weeks older than I was, and was already walking quite everywhere. And she said, that day, that was the last finger. It was like, oh, heck no. If he can do it, I can do it. And I repaid him for his help by teaching him how to break out of his playpen. They put me in the playpen with him thinking they could stop me. It didn't work.
A renegade at 2.
That's right. Well, even before 2, I was just a year old. So it's like, yeah, nobody's putting me in the playpen. Thank you very much.
Well, that person is bound to be an artist.
Yeah, actually, I think that is art lends itself toward the rebel in society.
Breaking the edges, breaking old forms to make new ones.
Exactly. We look for the connections between things that other people don't see any relationship to. And we find it.
You said that right. Mm-hmm.
So, this podcast isn't actually about me. Today's episode
but I already
is about
know
you.
It. But it's interesting because I already know everything about me. So,
but I don't know everything about you. So tell me a little bit. You mentioned you have a podcast. So tell me a little bit about that.
Mm-hmm. It's called The Poet and the Poem from the Library of Congress. And I'm celebrating my 45th year on air.
Wow.
I started out on radio in 1977. Then I took it to the Library of Congress in 1997, where it went national. And I have a series. First of all, it's a radio series, which is free to all public radio. And the podcast goes globally on eServe. And then it goes into upload on Apple Podcasts. So the Poet gets a lot, gets about 9,000 hits just on Apple. And it really helps the art. It really does. And it helps me stay alive because I have that wonderful thing that you're experiencing, the infusion of another person's energy, to occupy another person's sensibilities. And it's very rewarding.
Oh, I imagine it is. Plus the exposure to other artists. It's always good
wonderful
to have that creative influence come into your sphere.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So I've done about 3,000 poets, and about 1,000 are archived. It's been kind of hard. I have really, every year I write grants because, as you say, we could enter capitalism, but capitalism doesn't know it yet. So what the funding allows is broadcasting, uploading, production, and then archiving at the George Washington University Library. But I have about 1,000, I'm afraid, just saved from 3,000.
Wow.
But I'm still going strong. I have about 20. I do about 20 a year for a series. And I have one up in the air right now while I'm recording the next one.
That is so awesome. It's good to have somebody championing the underdogs of society. And I think we artists tend to be, as creatives, we tend to be, at very least, not necessarily recognized for our contributions the way that I think that we should be.
Well, I felt early on, why should someone else have the airwaves and not poetry? Why should we hear about disinfectants and cornflakes? Why couldn't poetry occupy that space? And so I grabbed onto social media as soon as I was able, because it's just about delivery. It's not about content. I mean, the content's always been there. I just used the delivery. So instead of having 20 in my classroom, I had 200,000 on air. And that is what I wanted to have, to just get it out there. It's just distribution,
It's very,
it keeps me busy. And I have, of course, I write every day and teach 3 days a week. So I teach poetry workshops. So it's all about either writing, broadcasting, producing, or publishing for me.
So do I understand correctly? You have a new book coming out?
Yes. I have 2 books that came out recently. One is called Grace Art, and it has my paintings and poems. And then the other is a book in the voice of Madame de Staël, who was an 18th century writer that no one seems to know anything about, which bothered me. And she was Napoleon's bitterest foe and helped to unseat him. She wrote 40 books on political treatises, novels, and I thought, we have got to know her. So I wrote a book of poems in her voice, letters, and they are historically accurate, but kind of fiction based on fact. That just came out. And my new and selected poems is due in this year in October.
Nice. Very nice. I love that you delved into history and found this woman who had so much influence, but so little recognition in modern times. It reminds me of, in February, I was working with a lady. Path to Publishing is one of the sponsors of my podcast. And so I work closely with her, and we were putting together her social media campaign. And of course, February is Black History Month. And so I did some little bit of research, and I found that the first published poetess in North America was actually a Black woman named Phyllis Wheatley.
Oh, absolutely.
And I was like, that is so awesome. But why we don't read that in history books?
She's getting to be more well-known. My whole field is to take women who have been eclipsed by history and to bring them to life. And I've done Mary Wollstonecraft, 18th century writer who was the first feminist we ever had, who wrote The Vindication of the Rights of Women. I have the only play written ever about her and the only book of poems. And I have Quilting the Sun, the play I wrote that was in New York recently was about Harriet Powers, whose quilts hang in the Smithsonian and the Boston Museum of Art, but nobody knew who she was. And I had to research her life and shine a light on it. And then I did Anna Nicole Smith because do you remember who she was?
Oh, I do. I remember.
Well, I felt that she was getting a bad rap. And I saw what she could have been with a little help from a decent upbringing. So I wrote a book in her voice, and I wrote a wonderful play which vindicated her.
Mm.
I think she's very happy about it.
Well, I can imagine if she were able to tell you, she would probably tell you, thank you. I think that we often, the media, I tell people all the time, don't let the media be the one to paint your story for you, because I promise you it's not going to be a flattering portrait.
Ouch.
You should always own your own story. At least have a version of your story put out by you.
Wow.
The media may challenge it. They will. If you're a big enough name, they will challenge the story you put out. But at least your version will be there.
Oh my, if people should learn that in kindergarten. They really should. Because how many times have you been misrepresented in the press,
Yeah. Take a look at any big name, and I guarantee you there's a lot of misrepresentation in the press, both good and bad. Like sometimes they'll be, treated like they're some kind of saint when the reality of their life is far different from that. And sometimes they'll be treated as the massive villain when the reality of their life is nothing like that at all.
I saw the documentary, The Mystery of Marilyn Monroe, last night, and that is bringing home exactly what you're saying. It's on Netflix.
Interesting. Yeah, I don't subscribe to Netflix, but that's okay.
But you know Marilyn Monroe.
Oh, yeah, I do know Marilyn Monroe. She's pretty much iconic American 1950s, 60s.
But how she was handled publicly is what it's about.
And there's a lot of people that were mishandled publicly one way or the other.
Yes, Anna Nicole Smith was treated like a buffoon, filled with drugs and propped up by manhandlers. And when I saw her on television after she had given birth to a baby, and I saw her beautiful cheekbones and her hair with no makeup, and I saw the vulnerability and what she could have been. And that's when I wrote the book and the play, because I knew that if she had had half a chance, fame is a bitter pill. Fame is a killer. Celebrity is a great hardship.
It can be, very much so, especially for people. I think there's a great misconception that if you have enough money, all your insecurities shall be washed away and you shall feel all the confidence in the world and all the cures in the world. And the reality is that I spent the first year of my business ghostwriting for people who had way more money than I ever dreamed of and had accomplished way more than I'd ever managed to accomplish. And in the process, what I saw consistently was that money didn't take away their insecurities by any stretch of the imagination. In fact, it amplified them. Because they got to this point where they were surrounded by people, but they weren't sure whether the people were there for them or for the money. So any insecurity they have about how lovable they are or their worthiness to be loved just gets amplified incredibly. And I think fame tends to do the same thing. It's like, are you here for me, or are you here for what you think I can do for you in terms of connections and opportunities?
Of course, because the Italian word for fame is hunger, fame.
Yeah, it would leave you famished.
Hunger. One can never get enough. It seems that the celebs can never get enough to fill that black hole, whatever it is.
Yeah, well, it does become that emptiness. I think that's the same thing with a lot of the people that chase after millions and billions of dollars, is there's that hunger inside that they are seeking to fill with something outside of them.
Yes. And as they say, even if you own a chicken farm, you can only eat one egg in the morning. So
that's true. It's true. I mean, you might be able to stuff yourself with 4, but eventually you're going to pop. You know? Eventually you're going to run out of eggs you could eat. You know, your body only can handle so much, and life can only handle so much.
It's a good analogy.
Mm-hmm. It is. So tell me about your new book that's coming out, the most recent one.
New and selected. Well, it was actually a very emotional experience because I had to go back to 1979 and read my life and choose the poems that were going to be published and to relive, you know, a life. The past is gone. And there's the pain that it is so final and so gone. The only way we make it permanent is through our writing. So I was revisiting the past, my husband, who is now dead, when we were young. I had to go through all those periods, and it was extremely emotional putting it together. But I did get to keep in, well, I think I have about 20 books represented and about 6 that I didn't select from. So there's about 6 poems from each book, something like that. And it brings it up to date with my most recent books. So you can see the trajectory of a life. But, you know, Brandy, we are always writing the same story, as you know. No matter how much we're writing, we're saying the same thing again and again with different words. So my themes throughout the book are so apparent, you know. It's about being a woman, being a military wife, which was really very interesting for 25 years, and being what it is to lose, to have children grow and leave you. I mean, these are all very mundane, universal things, but it's how, because they're mine, they are inimitable, because no one else could have written them or felt them. So they are unique, although the experiences are universal.
Well, it's the universality of what we have experienced that allows us to connect with other people through them. But it is the uniqueness of our perspective that makes them interesting to review.
Dolly Parton said, the great mentor Dolly Parton said, be yourself and then do it on purpose.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's what I tell my students. Just be more like yourself than you can ever be every time you write, because nobody else can do that. And that's all you have, really.
Yeah. Well, I will say the one thing you caught me, you said the past is in the past, except that for us, for subconscious, our subconscious doesn't have a sense of time.
Well,
so the past isn't in the past. The past is ever present with us.
There you go. You have brought up the most significant fact, philosophical. We have a database inside of us where everything exists. And that's the way I teach poetry. I get people to access the database with certain ways of getting in touch with it. But when you relive your past, and I'm reading a poem about my husband, then he's gone, you know, and I've made it permanent and brought it to the present, but the feeling of losing him was still very vivid.
Yes.
So the past, in a way, he is gone, but the facts remain in my database.
Right. Well, and actually, I will say something, though. As long as you continue to share his story, he isn't gone. He remains, and his impact on the world remains present. You simply become the carrier of his story.
We hope that's true. I sure would like to have a cup of tea with him, though.
I know. I miss my grandmother. You know, she's been gone for, oh my goodness, 8 years now, but I still miss her very much.
So true.
And my father has been gone for, 13 years now, and definitely wish I could call him up and have a chat, but you know, we don't get to do that, but we can ensure that their impact continues to be felt throughout the world when we write about them and when we share their story with others.
Amen, sister. Amen.
And I think also for me anyway, I know I went back and was rewriting some of my story, and the more that I have done it, the more that I found bits and pieces of myself that I needed to update, like bits and pieces of my story that I needed to revisit and see from a new perspective. Like when it happens to you when you're 4, you don't have all the information available to you that you do when you're 44 or when you're 48 or when, so when you go back into those older stories, bringing your present self with you, you can sometimes unlock things that you didn't see before because you're bringing this new perspective with you.
Of course.
And so old history becomes new.
Yes. The adult looking at the child is the perspective.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. It's kind of like, I think most people actually really need to sit down and write their stories and revisit the story, because there's so much that you think is true about yourself that really isn't true. It was just written based on your limitations of knowledge about why people do what they do. Like, I'll give you a perfect example. When I was 4, my father left from Mississippi and he didn't come back. I didn't see him again until I was 24. And that 4-year-old little girl, her daddy was her whole world. She just adored him. And it broke her heart that he left. And the story she wrote at the time was, well, okay, if the man that says he loves me more than anything else in the world could just up and leave without looking back, well, then I must not be lovable. It must be a problem with me. Not that there was something wrong with him or something wrong with, his view, but that it must have been my problem. And so she carried that little story into the rest of her life. It wasn't until I was 36, I think, sitting down at the table, writing that story for the first time, looking at it, realizing I had allowed that 4-year-old's little story to wreck my entire life. It's like putting a child in charge of driving your car.
What a wonderful example.
It really is. It's like putting a 4-year-old child in charge of driving your car.
Oh, that's
Would you ever do it? No. I mean, if you're sane, right, you don't put a 4-year-old in charge of driving the car, because
fantastic.
What is the 4-year-old going to do? They're going to wreck the car.
I love that. I love that story.
But a lot of us allow the wounded 4-year-old inside of us to drive our lives with the same result, that we're constantly wrecking things. And we don't even understand why. We're doing the same things over and over again, self-destructive things, all because we're letting that 4-year-old drive the car. And so until we go back and examine our story and bring the adult into the picture who says, wait a minute, that's not the real story, sweetheart. The real story is your father was a paranoid schizophrenic, and he felt the best way he could protect you was to not be part of your life. And your mother agreed, which is why she worked hard to keep him out of your life. Whether or not she was an improvement on the model could be argued, but I mean, they were both working to help protect you. So it wasn't about you not being lovable. It was about you being loved so much that both parents were willing to do whatever they thought they had to do to protect you.
I'm sure you've written this.
Mm-hmm. That's a very different perspective. It's a very different perspective to bring into the picture. So I think that there's great value in us breaking open those old stories, even though it hurts to walk back into them. I mean, bring your Kleenex, because you are going to experience it the same way you did the first time through. All the pain's going to be there that you haven't processed. All of the fears, all of the heartbreak will be waiting for you. But the good thing is that once you have done this, and you may need to do it multiple times, before you're really gotten it processed. But the good thing is that there will be healing on the other side of doing it. So, yeah, I'm a big believer in people cracking open their stories and walking back into those, because I think that what we do is, have you ever met somebody who's a real neat freak? Like everything has to be exactly in a certain place. Ever met somebody like that?
I have some children like that.
You walk into their home and there's it's immaculate, and you're thinking to yourself, who are these aliens? How do they manage this? I don't get it. Well, what I've learned is that every person that's like that has this one area of their home where they store all the junk they don't want everybody else to see, right? There's basically this junk closet, if you will, or junk room. And that's where they put all the stuff they don't want you to see. And mentally, we do that with all the stuff that we're ashamed of, or that hurt us, or that frightened us, or that traumatized us, and we don't want to deal with. We create this mental junk closet, and we shove that stuff in, lock the key, and hope nobody ever looks. We don't even let ourselves look in that closet because we're afraid of what's going to come out tumbling out when we do. But it's inside of that closet where our greatest gems are hiding. Our richest treasures are all hiding in that junk closet. We just have to have the courage to go into the junk closet, pull out what we think is junk, examine it, crack open the beauty that's in there, and profit from it. But it takes courage, a great deal of courage, because we don't like to face those emotions that don't feel good. And a lot of those emotions that don't feel good are in those negative things that happen to us.
I guess do you teach writing, Brandy?
Not yet. I mean, I teach kind of like on a loose basis. Periodically, people will ask and I will teach them, but it's one of my passions. So is that art of writing.
Yes, it's the basis of my teaching, is to have people discover who they are.
Mm-hmm. Well, until you have the courage to open up about who you are, where you are, exactly as you are, without the masks or the things that you're hiding from, you can't actually be loved for who you are, where you are, exactly as you are. Because all you're showing other people is an illusion. You're never having the courage to show them who that person is.
I say that writing is not about language, it's about courage.
It is about courage. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Language is the tool we use to get to the heart of the matter. But good writing, the greatest writing, is about basically cutting open your heart and letting the words bleed onto the page. You know, it's you pouring yourself out onto that page, having the courage to take off all the masks and all the things that you show the world when you think that people are going to judge you, and saying, this is who I am, and inviting them into that space. And it does take tremendous courage, because you are going to meet people who judge you. You are going to meet people who are like, you're a mess. And you better be comfortable with the fact that, yes, I am a mess. I am a hot mess. I am a walking hot mess, and I'm okay with that. You know, I think that's why perfectionism is the antithesis of being a great writer. You can't be a perfectionist. You can want things to be perfect, but you're never going to be perfect. And if you let perfection stand in your way, you will never put anything out there.
Well, I don't have to worry about that.
I don't either. It's not going to be a problem for me. I decided a long time ago that the price of being a perfectionist was too high to pay. I could not afford it.
It doesn't work anyway.
No, it doesn't. It actually took me until I was 27 to realize that my efforts to be what everybody else wanted me to be were causing me to lose sight of who I really was. And that I needed to find that person, and that I needed to become okay with who that person was, and not back down from being that person, because I'm the only person that can be.
Yep, all the rest are taken.
Exactly. Well, and you know, the older I've gotten, the more I realized I wouldn't want their mess anyway. They're no less messy than I am. Some of them may be better at hiding the mess than I am, but they're no less messy. Everybody's just got mess in a different place.
Very true.
So how long have you been teaching writing? How many years?
Oh, about 60.
Did you start off in a public school?
I did. I've taught on every level. I've raised 4 children and somehow managed to teach in the public schools. Then I went to teach at Antioch College in the 70s as playwright and poet in residence. Then I have I go to different colleges as invited, but I spent 28 years at St. Mary's College of Southern Maryland, just every May, 1 month a year for 28 years as poet in residence. So I got a good look at about hundreds of students going through. And now I teach on Zoom, and I teach 4 workshops a week.
Wow, that's a lot of teaching a week.
It is, but during COVID, it was a life-sustaining venture. And my most marvelous group, no, I like them all, but I have 6 women who were very accomplished in their fields and at the top of the peak, really, in law, painting, music, and they each wanted to try their hands at poetry. So these 6 women who did not know each other came together in a workshop. They worked with me for 3 years. Every other week, they've learned every form. They showed up. These were mature people who had a lot to give. And we've just published a book called The Song in the Room, which features
beautiful.
an anthology. So they had never even ventured into poetry, but now they're practicing poets, which is all you can do is practice every day, right?
Well, that's it. Writing is also about the journey. This is why I think that writers will always look at their work and go, oh, I could have done that better. Sure, you could have, because the very act of writing causes you to grow in unanticipated directions. You change your thinking, you revise how you see things, you gain new perspectives. I mean, as a fiction writer, I know that sometimes I'm sitting there thinking, okay, I have never done this thing, but how would I feel if I approached this? From this character's point of view, how would that be for me? And then I'm forced to sit there and do a little research into how other people have approached it. And then I sit there and think about, okay, well, knowing what I know based on my research, what would my emotions be in this situation? How would this hit me? And bring that into my writing. And then that broadens my perspective of the research and, of course, the change in thinking. So I think that you grow as you write. Every bit of it is about growth.
That's it. And these women have started a whole new life, a wonderful, rich life.
That is incredible.
It is.
And so rewarding to know that you're a part of that, I'm sure.
It's great fun. And then I have some young college students who I help just because they don't have creative writing in their colleges. And I have a group of poets who I taught in 1972, the graduating class of 1972 from Antioch College, and we're still together.
Wow.
We went away. We've parted for 30 years. They got married, unmarried, married each other. Then we all came back together about 10 years ago, and we've been a workshop ever since. The same people I taught at 20 are now 70.
Wow. That is impressive.
Yeah, it's great.
I mean, that's got to be incredibly for you.
Oh, it's
an incredible experience.
Phenomenal to see how people approach poetry at 20 and how they do it at 69. It's just a miracle. And we're all of course, very close because we share the same pieces of the same puzzle. Mm-hmm. So that's another workshop. I have very different workshops. And then one of the workshops is really studying the canon of poetry because I really hate the thought that people write without knowing our antecedents. So I have a group where we actually study a different poet every month. So those are my groups. And then I have a play reading group. Oh, yes, where we read classical plays. So it keeps me alive. That's all I have to say, because I'll be 90. I'll be 90 in October.
Wow. And, congratulations.
Well,
in advance.
I made it this far. And I do believe that it's better than being in a rest home.
I think so. I think that's part of the benefit of being a perpetual learner is that you keep your mind active and growing, and you don't stagnate. I think that's one of the greatest dangers is to our mental health and our physical health is
Well,
stagnation.
being with other artists, is the greatest gift. To be of people the same consciousness, it is a blood transfusion, an energy transfusion, and the only way I could live, really.
I can imagine. That is so incredible. And of course, now your poetry is going to be on the moon. The man in the moon is going to be listening to your poetry.
Absolutely. The first aliens are going to be, and we're going up with Bach and Andy Warhol.
Well,
So
now there's something. No, not at all.
traveling companions.
So I'm curious, just curious, how many of the poets and artists that were selected are women versus men?
Are you talking about the podcasts?
Oh, no, for the what's being sent to the moon.
A fair amount of women, because this physicist is very cool and very hip. And I would say that the curating visual artists, I would say they're evil, absolutely half, if not more, the visual artists. He curated from 91 countries.
Nice.
In this case, it shows progress.
It does.
Because here's a man who works with robots and considers robots, discriminated against as minorities. So you can see he's very enlightened.
Indeed. Well, actually, that is a topic that humanity is going to have to soon address. We're creating artificial intelligence, which in a sense, we are creating children. And do we have the right to treat them as just servants when we're giving them intelligence and decision-making capability? Or is there a greater obligation to them?
Well, he is teaching poetry to the robots, and he said he considers himself a translator because when the poetry comes out, he has to tweak it and figure it out as if he's translating from another language. So if you're filling robots up with poetry, you're going to get elevated kinds of behavior. Mm-hmm. So it's what we put in is what we're going to get out.
That's my supposition. Actually, it's been a long progress, but I'm working on a book called If Words Could Kill. And it's where humanity has advanced to the point where they can 3D print another human being. Okay. And so this guy takes a book character and uses the 3D printer to bring him to life. And at first for him, it as an abstract concept, it's a thought that, this is just going to be somebody I can pal around with, and I'll impress the girl that I love by doing this because this is part of her project. And so, I'll help her succeed. So I'll impress the girl that I want to be with, and I'll gain a friend in the meantime. He's not thinking about the entity that he creates as having its own feelings, emotions, desires, and human inclinations. And then he encounters reality, and
good idea.
He has to take account of his role in creating this human being. So what is our responsibility and our obligation to beings that we create?
That's what this physicist is working on.
I got to meet that guy.
Well, I'll send you the podcast.
Well, thank you.
Least. Yeah.
Yeah. Appreciate that.
Which talks about the robots.
Because that is something that I am contemplating. I believe that if we treat them as we would beloved children, and we raise them as we would beloved children, then we have nothing to fear from AI. But if we treat them poorly, and we treat them as nothing more than stepping stools to getting what we want, well, then we may not like the consequences of what we create. Yeah.
I'm going to want to read what you wrote.
I haven't finished it yet. It's like a long work in progress, but I think this is the year that I'm actually going to tap it and finish it off because I think it needs to be out there. I think that as more and more AI comes to light, people need to stop and think ahead of time, how do we want this to go? Because there's a lot of different ways it can play out. Not all of them are good for humanity, but I think if we treat AI with respect from the beginning, then we will find that we have partners in accomplishing what we want rather than a situation of tyrants versus oppressed.
Well, that's a very timely topic.
Mm-hmm. So sometimes your creative juices get put on hold for a reason. It's like it comes to the surface at the time that it needs to be. That's what I feel anyway.
I hope.
So I truly believe that we are given, I think that we don't so much just write characters as we discover them. That our role as writers is not so much to create characters as it is to discover who this character is. It's more like we've been chosen to tell this story. We're just sort of the pen that they chose to use because we're the right person for the job with the right perspective to bring.
There's a certain amount of channeling.
Mm-hmm. I do believe that. Well, Grace, it has been a pleasure talking to you today. I'm looking forward to seeing your poetry on the moon and your new book coming out and all the other things you've got going on.
Well, I think we made new friends today, and
I think so.
And we'll be in touch with each other. I'm absolutely sure.
Oh, I'm sure of it. My email inbox is always open.
It's going to get filled pretty quickly, but it was wonderful to meet you with all of your vitality and energy and goodwill. I really feel we've had a wonderful time.
It has been. And again, you're watching It's Truly Novel, the podcast where we bring you all things new on the internet, including new poetry on the moon, which you're not going to find anywhere else. Thank you, Grace, for joining us. You have a wonderful day.